It was a cold, gray morning in April when Mark found himself standing in front of a towering office building. The glass windows reflected the dreary sky overhead. Mark had come for an interview, but he felt a knot in his stomach. There was a sense of nervous excitement swirling inside him. He had always dreamed of working for a big company, and this was his chance. As he adjusted his tie and took a deep breath, Mark walked hesitantly toward the entrance. He stepped through the revolving door and into the bright, bustling lobby filled with busy people. Phones rang and the sound of clicking shoes echoed around him. Mark approached the receptionist, a woman with a tightly pulled bun and glasses that sat low on her nose. I'm here for an interview with Mr. Mark stumbled over his words slightly. The receptionist glanced up and pointed toward the elevators. Take the elevator to the 12th floor, she said, returning her focus to the computer in front of her. Mark navigated through the crowd, his heart pounding. He pressed the button for the elevator, and after a few moments of waiting, the metal door slid open. Inside, he was alone. He tried to calm himself, recalling some of the advice his friends had given him, but his mind kept racing as the numbers lit up on the panel. The elevator stopped, and he stepped out onto the 12th floor. It was quieter here. The atmosphere felt more serious, more professional. He glanced around, looking for the interview room. His stomach churned as he spotted a large conference room with a glass wall, which gave him a clear view of a group gathered inside. They were all in suits, their faces serious and focused. As he walked down the hallway, Mark spotted a tall man in a dark suit pacing back and forth. He looked like he was deep in thought. Mark hesitated, but then with a determined breath, he approached the man. "Excuse me, sir," Mark started, trying to sound confident. The man turned and looked at Mark. He had sharp features and there was something commanding about his presence. The man asked. "Yes, I am," Mark replied, surprised that this stranger seemed to care. "Nice to meet you, Mark. I'm Henry, the chairman of this company," he said, extending his hand. Mark shook it, feeling a mix of awe and anxiety. Here was the chairman himself, right in front of him. "I can show you the way," Henry offered, and Mark couldn't believe his luck. Feeling a spark of hope, he touched the knot in his tie, ready to follow. They walked together down the hallway, and Mark tried to keep his composure, his mind racing with questions. Henry suddenly asked, glancing sideways. "Honestly, yes," Mark admitted. Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Passion is important. But remember, interviews are also about finding the right fit." Mark swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that advice. He had never thought of it that way. They approached room 1205, and just before they stepped inside, Henry stopped and turned to Mark. "Listen, if you get the job, it won't always be easy. There will be pressure, stress." Mark felt inspired. This was a man who had climbed to the top, who had faced challenges and still kept moving forward. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "You will stay true to yourself, and that's what counts," Henry replied with a slight smile. Just before they entered, Henry looked at Mark again, more seriously now. "But remember, you might need to take risks." Mark nodded, taking in every word. It felt like a moment of truth. Perhaps this was the encouragement he needed. They entered the room, and Mark's heart raced again as he faced several interviewers seated at a long table. His eyes met theirs, and his pulse quickened. But before he could feel overwhelmed, he glanced at Henry, who offered him an encouraging nod. Mark took a deep breath and introduced himself, focusing on each word as it came out. The interview began, and Mark found himself answering questions about his experiences, his aspirations, and his thoughts on teamwork. He shared his passion for design and how he believed creativity could solve problems. As he spoke, he began to feel more confident. The nervousness melted away like snow under the warm sun. As the minutes ticked by, he felt like he was connecting with the interviewers, sharing his ideas and sparks of creativity. And just when he thought the atmosphere couldn't lighten up anymore, Henry entered the room again, leaning against the door frame with a smirk. "Mark, I just overheard your last answer," Henry said playfully. "You've got the right spirit." Mark smiled, feeling energized by Henry's presence. The interviewers chuckled lightly, and just like that, the tense mood dissipated. The conversation turned more casual, and Mark felt like he was not just a candidate, but a part of a larger discussion. Finally, after what felt like hours, the interview wrapped up. Mark, slightly breathless yet exhilarated, thanked everyone for their time. As he stepped out, he glanced back at Henry, who clapped a strong hand on his shoulder. "You did well," Henry said. "Thank you, sir," Mark replied, feeling grateful. "Call me Henry," he insisted, his tone friendly. Mark couldn't hold back his grin. It felt like a validation, a sign that he was on the right path. As he prepared to leave, Henry added, "I'm heading upstairs for a meeting. Why don't you join me for a few moments?" Mark's heart raced. This was unexpected. Sure. He followed Henry back to the elevators, excitement bubbling within him. Once they reached the 14th floor, Mark walked into a spacious, bright room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. The walls were adorned with various artwork that inspired creativity. Mark felt alive here, almost as if he could breathe in the ambition and vision that filled the air. Henry gestured to a chair close to a large table. Mark settled in, feeling both nervous and thrilled. He didn't belong in this room, but somehow it felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The meeting began. There were discussions about upcoming projects, and soon everyone's focus shifted to Mark. Henry asked, surprising him, Mark's breath caught in his throat. Everyone was looking at him, waiting. Gathering his thoughts, he articulated his ideas, drawing from his experiences and what he had seen in the market. As he spoke, people began nodding, and he could feel the room tightening into a focus on his words. The passion he had for the work surfaced, and he poured his heart into his thoughts. Mark had never felt more sure of himself. He could almost hear the beating of his own heart in time with the rhythm of inspiration that filled the room. When he finished, the room erupted into applause, and he felt his cheeks flush. Henry placed a firm hand on his back. See, Mark couldn't believe what had just happened. It was as if all his fears, worries, and expectations melted away into a single moment of clarity. There was something about that encouragement that ignited a spark within him, a realization that he wasn't just a passerby, he had something valuable to say. As the meeting continued, Mark engaged in discussions, offering insights and perspectives. The hours flew by, and although he had come for an interview, this felt like a turning point. Not only did he feel appreciated, but he was also welcomed into a world he had only dreamed of seeing. Finally, the meeting came to a close, and everyone began to gather their things. Mark stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below, feeling a sense of connection. Just then, Henry approached him again. "Mark," he said, his voice low but earnest, "always believe in what you can contribute. Pushing boundaries is key in this industry." Mark smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you, Henry. Remember, this is just the beginning for you," Henry added. "Keep pushing forward." With those words, Mark felt a thrill rush through him. This wasn't just one interview, it was a whole new start, a door wide open to everything he had hoped for. As he stepped back down to the main lobby, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed a threshold today, from uncertain to bold, from invisible to being seen. As he stepped out into the cool afternoon air, he looked up at the building towering above him. He was not just an aspiring candidate anymore, he had found a sense of direction. Mark walked away with a renewed purpose, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Sometimes all it took was asking for directions to find unexpected paths leading to truly remarkable places. The bustling city was alive with the sounds of honking horns and the chatter of hurried crowds, but Mark stood still, staring at the towering glass building in front of him. He had arrived early, just like he always did for important meetings, but this time was different. Today was pivotal, a moment that could change the course of his life. He looked down at his watch. The smooth hands ticked seconds away like a countdown, each passing moment adding to the tension creeping into his chest. Just then, as he brushed a bead of sweat from his forehead, he caught sight of a tall man striding confidently past sharp suit, slicked back hair, and air of authority. Mark instinctively stepped back, feeling small like a shadow in the glow of ambition. Gathering courage, he approached a nearby group of employees emerging from the building. "Excuse me," he said, voice slightly shaky. They exchanged glances, and an older man with a gentle smile pointed to the bank of elevators. "Just take one of those to your right." "Thanks," Mark said, heart pounding. He headed toward the elevators, knowing this interview with Mr. Jennings, the company's chairman, could be his big break. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside the elevator, Mark caught a glimpse of himself in the polished metal sweaty palms, a forced smile, but he forced himself to stand tall. The numbers flickered as he ascended, each one representing a level of authority, ambition, and dreams. Finally, the doors opened with a ding and his heart raced again. Stepping out, he found himself in a sleek, modern lobby. It was lined with abstract art that seemed to shout innovation and creativity. His eyes darted around, searching for the interview room, but instead they landed on a glass-walled conference room filled with people. The atmosphere was charged and the weight of expectations hung thick in the air. Mark approached a woman sitting at a reception desk. I'm here for my interview with Mr. Jennings," he said, trying to sound calm. "Right down the hall, room 1205, she replied without looking up from her phone. As he walked away, uncertainty clawed at him. He could hear the murmur of voices rising and falling in the conference room, laughter interwoven with serious discussions. In that moment, he felt out of place like an outsider peering into a world of power and promise. He took a deep breath and finally found the door to room 1205. Before he could knock, it swung open and he was suddenly face to face with Henry Jennings, the chairman himself, tall, commanding, and with a sharp gaze that seemed to penetrate through Mark's bravado. "Mark," Henry said, his voice smooth yet assertive, "you're just in time." Mark stepped inside, heart pounding like a drum. The room was filled with several interviewers, all observing him with keen interest. He felt the weight of their gazes, but then Henry's encouraging nod offered a glimmer of reassurance. "Let's get started," said an interviewer with glasses perched low on her nose. Mark opened his mouth, ready to spill out rehearsed lines, but suddenly he froze. The words felt trapped in his throat. He had practiced countless times, but now, facing the very people who could shape his future, it all vanished. But Henry leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his presence radiating confidence, and somehow Mark felt a surge of courage. "I'm Mark," he began, voice steadier than before. "I've spent the last few years honing my skills in design and marketing." As he spoke, he looked each interviewer in the eye, feeding off their reactions. A hint of interest sparkled in their expressions, and it energized him. One interviewer asked, leaning forward, Mark shared a recent project he had worked on, a marketing campaign for a local nonprofit. He explained how he analyzed the market, connected with the target audience, and successfully implemented a fresh strategy. With each word, he watched the interviewers nod, their earlier skepticism melting away. Just as he began to feel more confident, Henry interjected, "What about your creative process, Mark?" The question struck him like lightning. This was the kind of inquiry that pierced through surface-level answers. It wasn't just about skills, it was about his essence, the thought and passion behind his work. Mark took a breath. "When I face a challenge, I dive deep. I research, brainstorm ideas, even ask for feedback. I believe that collaboration can lead to unexpected creativity." This time, Mark saw more than just nods. There was enthusiasm, shared sparkles of inspiration. Maybe he could belong here. However, just when he felt that rush of confidence, the clock in the corner of the room chimed. The interviewer glanced at Henry. "We have a tight schedule today," she said, looking apologetic. A knot tightened in Mark's stomach. Did he have enough time to make an impact? As the conversation carried on, he gave thoughtful answers, but doubt crept back in. Was he leaving a lasting impression? In a moment of desperation, he took a risk. He looked directly at Henry. "I have an idea I'd love to discuss," he said. He raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparked in his gaze. Mark launched into his vision, leveraging social media to create a dynamic, interactive campaign that could draw in the community while showcasing the company's mission. As he spoke, he could see minds shifting, sparks igniting. Interviews were often about giving the right answers, but Mark was trying to share his passion. With each idea, he saw them leaning in, eyes lighting up. And that's when he noticed Henry gesturing for the others to listen closer. Suddenly, the door to the conference room opened, and a new figure entered, an older man, clearly an executive. The sudden disruption felt like a storm cloud moving in, overshadowing the moment. But then Henry stepped forward, addressing the new arrival with a smile. "Jim, I want you to hear this young man's proposal." Mark's heart raced. Here he was, thrust into the spotlight. But instead of feeling terrified, he found strength in the support of the chairman. "Thank you, Henry," Jim said with a nod, taking a seat. And in that moment, all the fear evaporated. Mark shared his idea again, this time more passionately. He saw the interest grow in Jim's eyes, felt the energy shift in the room. "Interesting," Jim replied thoughtfully. "What's your timeline for this initiative?" Mark dove into details about phases and strategies, outlining a realistic timeline. He could feel the excitement building, the energy shifting to something positive. By the time Mark wrapped up his presentation, there was silence in the room, but it wasn't an absence of engagement. It was a moment of contemplation. After a long pause, Henry turned to the group, eyes sparkling with determination. "This young man might just give us what we need to accelerate our vision." Just when the atmosphere seemed electrified, the interviewer cleared her throat. "That's very promising, Mark, but we must stress that this is just a conversation." Mark felt a sudden rush of disappointment, a wave threatening to wash over him. But Henry stepped in. "How about this, Mark? Why don't you come upstairs and present this to my executive board?" Mark blinked in disbelief. He echoed, heart racing. "Yes," Henry said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. With that, Henry turned to the others, wrapping up the meeting. Mark felt himself in a whirlwind, disbelief mixed with pure exhilaration. They exited the conference room, Mark trailing just behind Henry, who seemed to radiate authority and confidence. As they reached the elevators again, Mark's heart raced, every beat a reminder of what was at stake. The doors opened, and he stepped inside beside Henry. "Take a moment, breathe," Henry encouraged, sensing the tension rolling off Mark. "You've done more than just show your qualifications. You've showcased your ideas." Mark nodded, grateful for the support. The elevator climbed higher, and he could feel his anxiety morph into anticipation. What if this was the moment that changed everything? What if this was the start of a new adventure? As they stepped out onto the executive floor, the atmosphere was thick with professionalism. The walls were adorned with accolades and awards, the epitome of success. Mark felt tiny, but he nipped that thought in the bud. This was his moment. Henry led him down a corridor to a large boardroom with a massive table surrounded by heavy leather chairs. Mark could see a group of high-ranking executives already seated, all eyes on him. "Everyone, this is Mark," Henry announced, ushering him in. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 100 eyes weighing on him. But Henry's earlier words returned to him, his passion could shine through. "All right, Mark," one of the executives said, leaning forward. The rest of the world around him faded. Mark stepped forward, energized by the opportunity. He outlined his vision again, sparked by creative thoughts and insights. Each point brought palpable energy to the room, a dance of ideas unfolding. By the time he finished, it felt as if he had shared a part of himself with them, a piece of his ambition and creative spirit. A silence fell, and then one of the executives began to nod. "We need fresh perspectives," she said. Excitement surged through Mark. This wasn't just an interview, it felt like he was unveiling a new future, not just for himself, but for all of them. After what felt like an eternity, Henry spoke up. "Let's open the floor, questions, insights." The room exploded with discussion. Questions flew, ideas collided, and Mark found himself in the center of it all, billing answers back with an open heart. After what felt like a heated debate, one final voice rang out. We like this direction, but we'll need your commitment." In that moment, the world shifted again. "Absolutely," Mark answered, conviction filling his voice. With the weight of their buzz in the air, Mark understood this didn't just represent a job, it felt like a homecoming. He walked away from that elevator, out of that building, feeling lighter, like he had shed old fears and doubts. As he stepped onto the bustling streets outside, the sun broke through the cloud cover, and for the first time that day, Mark felt an overwhelming sense of possibility. What had started with a simple question asking for directions led him to a place where ideas flourished, where he could leave a mark. Today, he had not only asked for directions, but had found a path to greatness, and it was only the beginning. Mark had always considered himself a man of direction, but on this chilly morning, standing outside a towering glass skyscraper, he felt more lost than ever. The building loomed above him, its reflective surface gleaming under the muted sunlight, almost echoing the heartbeat in his chest. This was not just another job interview, this was the opportunity he had worked tirelessly for, his chance to step into a world where his dreams could take flight. He rubbed the back of his neck, fighting off a wave of uncertainty. With a determined breath, he made his way toward the entrance. Inside, the lobby was a whirlwind of activity. People hustled and bustled, their voices mingling with the soft chime of elevators. Mark approached a receptionist, her expression a mask of focus. "Excuse me, I'm here for my interview with Mr. Jennings," he stammered, trying to project confidence. "Room 1205 through those doors," she replied, not lifting her gaze. Mark gave a small nod and shuffled away. Each step felt heavier as the reality of the situation sank in. He glanced around the vibrant lobby, taking in the artwork that adorned the walls, pieces filled with life and color, a stark contrast to the icy grip of anxiety tightening in his chest. As he walked toward the glass doors that led to the hallway, he caught sight of a tall man in a dark suit moving swiftly through the crowd. There was something commanding about him, an undeniable air of authority. Mark watched as the man's sharp features and focused gaze seemed to command respect from everyone around him. With a sudden burst of courage, Mark decided to approach him. "Excuse me, sir," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The man turned to face Mark directly. It was Henry Jennings, the chairman of the very company Mark was hoping to join. He asked, his eyes piercing yet somehow warm. "Yes, I am," Mark replied, taken aback by the unexpected interaction. "Let me show you the way," Henry offered, an intriguing smile dancing on his lips. Mark's heart raced, a mix of disbelief and exhilaration propelling him forward. He followed Henry through the maze of the building, feeling like he was being led into some secret chamber of opportunity. As they walked, Mark couldn't help but feel the pressure of the moment. He asked, curious, "Just be yourself," Henry advised. His words resonated deeply within Mark. It was easy to get caught up in the fear of failure, but Henry's presence was comforting, filling him with a sense of belonging. They arrived at room 1205, where a few interviewers were already seated at a long table, their expressions a mixture of authority and expectation. Mark hesitated for just a moment, then stepped inside. "Everyone, this is Mark," Henry announced, his voice bringing the room to life. Mark took a breath, steadying himself as he settled into a chair. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and for a fleeting second, doubt flickered in his mind. But Henry's encouraging nod grounded him. "Tell us about yourself, Mark," one of the interviewers prompted. Mark's mind raced. My name is Mark. I've spent the last few years in marketing, focusing on design and strategy," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. Their eyes flickered with interest, and he felt a rush of courage. He spoke about a project he had led at his previous Java campaign that used personal narratives to engage the audience. As he painted the picture, he noticed the interviewer leaning forward, captivated by his passion. Another voice chimed in. Mark hesitated for a moment, remembering the late nights and the difficulty of juggling multiple perspectives from team members. "In one project, we had conflicting ideas about the direction. I organized a brainstorming session where everyone shared their thoughts, and we ended up crafting a campaign that combined everyone's vision." A nod of approval came from Henry, and Mark felt enthusiasm bubbling inside him. In this moment, he was not just making a case for himself, he was sharing a piece of who he was, the core of his creativity. "Interesting approach," an interviewer said, their tone shifting. "But what about your thoughts on risk?" The question struck Mark like lightning. Risks defined his career. Every step had been a leap into the unknown. "To me, risk is an opportunity in disguise. It challenges us to grow, to think outside the box," he said, feeling excitement surge through him. He could feel the room's energy shifting, a growing interest simmering beneath the surface, but just then the clock on the wall chimed unexpectedly, interrupting the conversation. The tension in the room thickened, and Mark sensed the urgency in the air. They had a tight schedule to keep. As the interviewers glanced at one another, one finally said, "We need to wrap this up. Thank you, Mark." A wave of disappointment washed over him. Just then, Mark caught Henry's eye, and there was a flicker of something, a spark of possibility. He took a breath, fighting against the tide of unease. Mark blurted out. Surprise rippled through the room, and Henry looked intrigued. "Go on," he encouraged. With newfound determination, Mark launched into his proposal for an innovative campaign that leveraged emerging technologies to connect with the audience on a personal level. It was about engagement, tapping into the desires and ambitions of their consumers, and building community through shared stories. He spoke with fervor, his eyes lighting up as he painted the vision of a brand that didn't just market products but created experiences. In that moment, he could hear the murmurs of approval, the shifting of interest. The room erupted in chatter, and before Mark had a chance to fully comprehend what was happening, Henry said, "Why don't you come upstairs and present this idea to the executive team?" The words hung in the air, thick with opportunity and disbelief. Mark echoed, hardly able to breathe. "Yes, let's go," Henry said, beckoning him forward. As they moved through the sleek hallways of the executive floors, Mark's heart raced. This was not just an interview, it was an invitation to belong to something bigger than himself. He felt a rush of gratitude for taking the chance to ask for directions, and now it was as if the universe was opening up before him. They arrived at the executive boardroom and Mark's stomach fluttered. This was an arena filled with decision-makers, powerful figures in the industry. The room was elegantly designed, a massive table surrounded by high-backed chairs. Tall windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, but Mark's focus was solely on the faces in the room. Henry introduced him, and in that moment Mark felt the full weight of expectation crashing down, but he remembered Henry's words to be himself. He felt the electricity of possibilities surge through him, and without hesitation he stepped forward. "Thank you for the opportunity. I'm thrilled to share my vision," he began, grounding himself in the passion that had fueled his journey. As he unfolded his ideas, the executives listened intently. Mark could see their intrigue growing with each point he made. He described ways to create a narrative around the brand, to build connections through social media and immersive customer experiences that went beyond traditional marketing methods. In the midst of his pitch, he noticed a few heads nodding in agreement, eyes shining with ambition. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about a collective vision, a shared future. When he wrapped up, a heavy silence filled the room, punctuated only by the sound of shifting notes. Then one executive leaned forward, his voice calm yet assertive. "These ideas have potential, but let's dig deeper." Mark's heart raced again, not with fear but with exhilaration. This was what he had wanted, to be challenged to think bigger. He opened up the discussion, drawing on his previous experiences to outline actionable steps. The conversation flowed, ideas bouncing off the walls like sparks igniting a flame. Suddenly, everything felt alive. Voices filled the room, buzzing with collaboration and energy. Mark was sharing his passion and expertise, drawing the executive team into his vision. He could see their wheels turning, and for the first time he felt the pulse of true possibility. After a deep discussion, the lead executive turned to Henry. "I think we'd like to move forward with Mark." A wave of emotion washed over Mark. This was the moment he had dreamed of, the beginning of something more. Hope surged in his chest, and he couldn't help but smile. As the meeting concluded, Henry clapped a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Well done." Mark was almost speechless, gratitude bubbling over. "Thank you, Henry." They exited the boardroom, and as Mark walked back through the building, he felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had crossed a threshold from uncertainty to possibility, from a mere job seeker to a man with a vision. As he stepped outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the city. The rush of life continued, but now it felt different. Mark had found his place in the world, a space where he belonged, and it all began with that simple moment asking for direction. In that instant, he realized that sometimes taking a chance on vulnerability can lead to unexpected opportunities. And as he walked away from the towering glass building, he felt not just relieved but empowered, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Mark was not just a man searching for a job, he was a man forging a new path, one filled with dreams and possibilities waiting to be realized. He was standing in front of a tower of glass and steel, heart racing like a freight train, feeling the weight of the world perched precariously on his shoulders. Mark was in the right place, but he felt undeniably out of his element. This was a day that could change everything for him. It was an interview that might lead to his dream job, yet no one told him how cold and uninviting the hallways of ambition could feel. Mark adjusted his tie for the third time that morning and glanced up at the gleaming windows above him. He could see reflections of people zipping by, fully engaged in their bustling lives inside. He took another deep breath and pushed the heavy glass door open, stepping into a world that felt like a different dimension. The lobby was filled with the hum of activity, the sound of heels clicking against the polished floor, hushed conversations, and the faint whir of elevators gliding up and down. Each remark, each laugh felt like it was puncturing through his confidence. He was a fish out of water, drowning in a sea of suits. As he shuffled to the reception desk, he could feel his palms starting to sweat. "Excuse me," he managed to stutter, his voice barely rising above the ambient noise. "I'm here for an interview with Mr." The receptionist barely looked up, her eyes glued to the screen. "Room 1205 down the hallway," she replied with a monotone tone that almost made Mark second-guess his existence. "Thank you," he mumbled, forcing himself to look purposeful as he made his way toward the interview room. His heart beat louder with every step. With each passing moment, doubt seeped into his mind like a persistent fog. Was he really ready for this? Did he belong here? The thoughts pushed him back, but he steeled himself. He was determined to show them who he was. As he approached room 1205, he overheard a group of employees discussing a recent project, their animated debate echoing in the corridor. Inspired by their energy, Mark took a deep breath. He knocked and the door swung open to reveal a stark conference room filled with important-looking people. "Welcome, Mark," one of the interviewers said, her tone unexpectedly warm, easing some of his anxiety. He stepped inside, saw the long table lined with faces deep in thought, and sat down, trying to keep his composure. "Tell us about yourself and why you're interested in this position," the interviewer prompted. Mark straightened up, ready to deliver his rehearsed lines, but as he started speaking, he felt an unexpected rush of vulnerability wash over him. His voice trembled, but he pressed on. As he spoke, he found that he could genuinely express himself. The tension in his chest loosened a little, and he could see some heads nodding. Another interviewer asked, leaning forward, intrigued. That question hit him. Mark remembered a project from a few months ago, a campaign designed to revitalize a small coffee shop's online presence. He smiled as he recalled the late-night brainstorming sessions filled with laughter and creativity. "We worked closely with the owner to capture her vision." He paused for effect, gauging their reactions. The air felt charged with interest. The change in their demeanor fueled his confidence further. But then, just as he thought he was finding his rhythm, the clock on the wall chimed, cutting the energy short. The interviewers exchanged glances, and Mark's stomach dropped. He sensed the urgency around them, a tension that tightened the room. "Thank you for sharing, Mark, but we have a busy schedule today," one of them said, the disappointment evident in her tone. Taking a deep breath, Mark's heart sank. Was that all he had? But before he could let despair engulf him, he caught Henry's eye, the chairman himself, who had been observing silently. There was something in Henry's expression that urged him to take a chance. Mark asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Henry's eyebrows raised slightly, a sign of intrigue. "Go ahead, Mark." Mark's pulse quickened. He mentioned a groundbreaking campaign he had envisioned, one that would integrate technology to create an immersive experience for customers, allowing them to become part of the story. "What if we used augmented reality to draw people in? They could interact with our brand in ways that feel personal and memorable." The room erupted into murmurs, excitement crackling like electricity. To his surprise, Mark felt the energy shift in his favor. He could see the interviewers leaning in, captivated by the potential of his idea. But just when he thought he was winning them over, the room door swung open and a new executive walked in, an imposing man with an air of authority. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Not at all, Jim," Henry replied smoothly, motioning for the new arrival to take a seat. Mark's heart raced. This was a crucial moment that could tip the scales. Mustering every ounce of courage, he turned to Jim. Jim raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That sounds promising." Mark plunged into the details with newfound fervor, tapping into his passion and presenting the concept like a seasoned salesman. He outlined the methods for using AR, how it could bridge the gap between digital and physical experiences. Energetic discussions filled the room, and Mark could feel the momentum building. Their questions flowed, each challenge igniting his passion even more, but then came a curveball. One executive asked, cutting through the excitement. Instantly, Mark's mind was racing. This was a pivotal moment. Mark watched as conversations buzzed around the table, excitement ramping up, but just as quickly as the energy built, it felt like a cliffhanger, leaving Mark hanging in suspense. "Let's take this offline for now," Jim finally said, leaning back. Mark felt a rush of adrenaline and possibility. The door had cracked open, and he was standing right there, ready to step through. As the meeting wrapped up, Henry approached, a grin spreading across his face. "You've done well, Mark." "Thank you, Henry," Mark replied, heart still racing. Then Henry surprised him even more. "Let's go upstairs." Stunned, Mark followed as they made their way to the elevator. A mix of disbelief and excitement surged through him. Here he was just a few hours ago, filled with uncertainty, and now he was being invited upstairs to engage with the innovators of the company. As the elevator doors opened, Mark stepped into a bright, expansive work area filled with creative minds. Whiteboards plastered with ideas, team members collaborating, and an atmosphere buzzing with energy enveloped him. His heart soared. Henry led him to a table where several key players were gathered. "Everyone, this is Mark." Mark could feel their eyes on him, assessing, evaluating. Taking a deep breath, he shared his vision again, this time the polishing touch of passion mingling with the seasoned expertise he had just witnessed. The discussions flowed, and ideas blending together, layering into a beautiful tapestry of potential. Mark felt alive, invigorated by the engagement around him. He was no longer standing on the sidelines. He was in the game, contributing to something much bigger than himself. As the team brainstormed, he realized that what had begun as a simple inquiry for directions had led him to this moment. It was more than just an interview. It was a chance to be part of something transformative. Finally, amidst the creative chaos, one of the executives turned to Mark. "If this all comes together, I see a real opportunity here." The rush of gratitude filled Mark as he nodded. Hours passed like minutes, filled with laughter and brainstorming sessions that wore on, but Mark felt an unwavering energy flowing through him. This was the start of a new chapter in his life. As the sun began to dip behind the buildings, casting an orange hue across the sky, Mark stepped out of the office. The cool evening air hit his skin, grounding him back to reality. He took a moment to breathe, letting everything sink in. He had asked for directions, and it had led him to the threshold of his dreams. The winding path had revealed itself slowly, but he was now charting a course toward his future. In that moment, Mark realized that sometimes simply asking for guidance could lead to the most unexpected opportunities. This wasn't just a job interview, this was an invitation to soar, to push limits, and to thrive in creativity. With a smile creeping across his face, Mark looked up at the skyscraper once more. It stood tall and proud, a monument to everything he had yet to achieve, and he was more than ready to embrace the journey ahead. He stood at the crossroads of ambition and self-doubt, staring at the towering skyscraper that seemed to scrape the clouds above. Mark could feel the rumble of life swirling around him, but he felt completely isolated. Today was the day that could define his future, but with every tick of the clock echoing in his head, uncertainty knotted his stomach. As he adjusted his tie, his palms grew sweaty. This wasn't just any job interview. It was for a position at a prestigious marketing firm known for its groundbreaking campaigns. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but standing here now, it all felt surreal. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside the cool, sprawling lobby. The bright lights reflected off pristine floors, illuminating the flurry of activity around him. People hustled by, busy with their own lives, their own ambitions. Mark could feel the weight of their focus, an unseen challenge he felt he had to rise to. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice wavering slightly. He approached the receptionist, a woman with jet black hair neatly pulled back. "I'm here for my interview with Mr." She barely looked up, her fingers clicking away at the keyboard. "Room 1205 down that hallway," she replied flatly. "Thank you," he said, though he barely heard her. He was already lost in his own thoughts as he moved toward the elevators. The hum of the building enveloped him, and he found himself staring blankly at the elevator numbers as they ticked by. When he finally arrived on the 12th floor, he stepped out into a world filled with sleek design and professionalism. Still feeling a surge of anxiety, Mark glanced around, feeling like he had entered a different universe where everyone belonged except him. He approached the door to room 1205 and knocked hesitantly. The door swung open, revealing a conference room filled with serious faces seated around a long table. He stepped inside, his heart pounding against his ribcage like a drum. "Welcome, Mark," one of the interviewers said, her voice welcoming yet commanding. She gestured for him to take a seat. Sitting down, Mark felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. "Tell us about yourself," another interviewer prompted. Mark took a deep breath, ready to deliver his rehearsed lines, but with each word he spoke, a wave of vulnerability washed over him. "I've worked in digital marketing for 5 years. His voice wavered, but he pushed onward. As he spoke, he noticed some of the interviewers leaning forward, intrigued. Encouraged by their interest, he continued to explain how he had led a successful campaign for a small local business, detailing how they used client testimonials to build trust with potential customers. It was going well, he could feel it, but just then a clock on the wall ticked loudly, interrupting the air. The interviewers exchanged glances, and Mark felt the ground shift beneath him. They had limited time. "Thank you, Mark." "A lot of candidates today," one of the interviewers said, their tone apologetic but firm. His heart dropped. Was that it? Had he not impressed them enough? Panic surged, but Henry, the chairman himself, who had been watching quietly from the side, suddenly intervened. Henry said, a look of curiosity on his face, "Before we finish, I'd like to hear more from you." Mark's heart raced. This was unexpected. "Well, actually, I was thinking about a new approach to engage our audience." Intrigued murmurs filled the room. For a fleeting moment, he could see a flicker of excitement in their eyes, and he pressed on. "Imagine if we could create a virtual experience that allows customers to interact with our brand in an entirely new way." Jim, another executive, leaned forward, clearly engaged. Mark took a deep breath, feeling more confident. A small team, software development costs, and partnerships with tech companies. Just as the conversation began to wrap around his idea, the door swung open, revealing another executive entering the room. It was Jim, the firm's president, a powerhouse. Mark felt the shift. The room seemed to tighten as he walked in, commanding attention. Jim asked, his voice steady and authoritative. "Not at all," Henry responded, gesturing for him to join. Mark's heart raced as he saw Jim take a seat. Would he be critical or supportive? His focus shifted back to Jim, ready for whatever challenge he might present. "I'd like to hear more about this augmented reality concept," Jim said, his eyes catching Mark's. Mark's passion surged again as he spoke. Today's consumers crave interactive experiences. They want to engage with brands that reflect their values. Intriguing looks exchanged between the executives as they considered his points. It felt like a moment suspended in time, with Mark standing at the cliff of opportunity, ready to leap. Finally, Jim turned to Henry. "I think we need to explore this further, perhaps in a dedicated meeting." Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him as the discussion continued. This was not just an interview anymore, it was a brainstorming session, a collaboration. But then, as the clock ticked its relentless pace, the head of HR interrupted. Mark felt his heart sink a little, but before he could spiral into disappointment, Henry spoke again. "Let's take this upstairs." For a moment, Mark could hardly process the request. Did the chairman just invite him upstairs? He nodded, feeling a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. As they headed to the elevator, the walls felt like they were closing in on him, but at the same time, the thrill of potential surged through his veins. It was as if he were being thrust into a realm of possibility he had only dared to imagine. Once they arrived on the executive floor, the atmosphere shifted from administrative to visionary. This was where the big decisions happened, the heart of the company. Mark felt the energy crackle around him like static electricity. Henry led him into a large boardroom where several powerful individuals were already gathered. Their expressions varied from curious to skeptical. Mark's heart raced. This was it, he was about to step into the lion's den. "Everyone, this is Mark," Henry said, his voice booming over the chatter. As Mark stood there, the weight of their expectations settled on his shoulders. He opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly every word felt like it could make or break him. Gathering his thoughts, he started explaining his ideas on augmented reality and the potential it had to redefine their engagement with customers. The passion behind his voice caught their attention, and he sensed the atmosphere start to shift. "Imagine a level where customers can not only see our products, but experience them walking through virtual showrooms, interacting with features in real time," he proposed, seeing their curiosity peak. His hands gestured animatedly, fueled by the sense of empowerment he felt being in this space. One executive asked, her arms crossed but her expression intrigued. The room erupted into a buzz of conversation, their thoughts intertwining, building off one another. The more they discussed, the more energized Mark felt. He had moved from presenting his case to actively collaborating with them, sharing in their mutual quest for innovation. Hours fled by as the dialogue unfolded, filled with ideas and plans that began to take root, markers scribbling on whiteboards, and enthusiasm swirled like a dance. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about a shared vision. Finally, as the sun dipped and shadows danced across the walls of the boardroom, one of the executives leaned in. This was the moment. A moment of silence filled the room, all eyes fixed on him. Finally, Jim spoke, a slight smile forming. "I'm impressed." Mark felt a rush of joy, but then reality set in. "Thank you." As the discussion wound down, Jim addressed the team. "Let's move forward with Mark's concept." A wave of relief washed over Mark. He had not only showcased his ideas, but had also made connections that opened the door to future possibilities. Stepping out of the boardroom, he felt a breath of fresh air rush over him. The coolness against his skin grounded him. A mix of exhaustion and exhilaration coursed through his veins, like the final notes of a powerful symphony. That day had started with uncertainty, a simple act of asking for directions. But now he had charted a new course, navigating through unexpected turns that led him to a place where his potential could grow. As he walked through the building, reflecting on the journey he had embarked on, he knew this was just the beginning. He couldn't wait to dive into this new adventure, grateful for every step that had brought him here. Mark stepped outside into the sunlight, something brighter than before filling him with hope. He had taken the plunge into the unknown, asked for guidance, and stepped into the opportunities that lay waiting ahead. And as he walked away from the towering building toward his future, he felt more alive than ever, ready to embrace the journey that lay ahead. He stood outside the gleaming skyscraper, the late morning sun reflecting off glass, creating bright, blinding flashes that filled his eyes. Mark had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, yet now that he was here, nerves gripped him like a vice. This wasn't just an interview, this was a chance to step into a new life. His palms were damp and he wiped them on his slacks, trying to will away the nervous energy swirling inside him. Taking a deep breath, he walked through the revolving door, which felt like stepping into another world. Inside, the lobby pulsed with life, people in sharp suits bustling back and forth, voices mingling in the air. The scent of fresh coffee wafted from a nearby cafe. Mark approached the receptionist, a woman with thick glasses and a focused expression. "Excuse me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here for my interview with Mr. Room 1205 down the hall," she replied, barely meeting his gaze before returning to her computer. "Thank you," Mark managed to say, already turning away. His heart hammered in his chest as he made his way down the hallway, each step echoing his uncertainty. Was he really ready for this? Did he belong here? As he neared the conference room, he caught snippets of conversation words like strategy and revenue, each one sinking deeper into his chest, amplifying his insecurities. But just then he noticed a tall figure striding confidently toward him, a man with an aura of authority that commanded attention. Mark's heart raced as he recognized Henry Jennings, the chairman of the company. "Excuse me, sir," Mark said, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. Henry paused, his sharp eyes landing on Mark. He asked, a knowing smile forming. "Yes, I am," Mark replied, almost breathless. "Come with me, I'll show you the way," Henry said, gesturing for Mark to follow him. As they walked side by side, Mark's mind raced. This was not just a chairman, he was the man who had built the company from the ground up. Mark felt dwarfed by the man's presence, yet something about Henry's demeanor made him feel slightly at ease. Henry asked casually, glancing at Mark as they approached the conference room. Mark took a deep breath. "I want to help elevate the brand. I believe in storytelling as a powerful way to connect with people." Henry nodded, clearly engaged in the conversation. "Good." They arrived at room 1205 and Henry stopped just outside the door. "Just remember, it's not just about what you can do." With that, he opened the door and beckoned Mark inside. The conference room was filled with several interviewers, and as they looked his way, Mark's stomach churned. He settled into a chair at the large table, feeling their eyes assessing him like a scrutinizing spotlight. "Welcome, Mark," one of the interviewers welcomed. "Let's start with your background." Mark took a deep breath, reciting the rehearsed answer that had danced in his mind for weeks. "I've spent the past 5 years in digital marketing." He explained how he had been integral in transforming a struggling startup into a recognizable brand. As he spoke, he saw a flicker of interest among the interviewers. "Interesting," one of them said, leaning in. That question pierced through his polished facade. Mark thought for a moment about a project he had nearly failed. "There was a campaign that just wasn't resonating with our audience," he began, his voice steadying with the memory. "Instead of giving up, we did a complete pivot. We reached out to our audience for feedback, and they told us what they really wanted." The interviewers nodded, visibly impressed. Mark felt a rush of confidence, buoyed by their interest. But just as he began to build momentum, the clock on the wall ticked loudly, ushering in an unexpected urgency. One of the interviewers glanced at her watch and then looked at the others. "We have limited time," she said, her tone shifting. Mark's heart dropped. Could this be it? Just before he let despair creep in, Henry, observing from the side, leaned in. He asked. This was Mark's chance to go beyond the surface, to dig deeper. "I'm not just here to promote a product, I'm here to promote a story and an experience." Henry's eyes sparked with interest, but the moment was short-lived. "I appreciate your passion," the interviewer said, glancing at her notes. Overwhelmed, Mark could feel his hopes slipping away, but just then Henry intervened again. "Wait," he said, his voice commanding attention. Mark blinked, stunned. This wasn't just an opportunity, this was a lifeline, he said, his enthusiasm rekindled. "What if we used augmented reality to enhance our campaigns?" A hum of interest flared in the room, and Mark felt the energy shift as he painted a picture of how this technology could draw customers in. One of the interviewers asked, scribbling notes. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the momentum build. "With the right partnerships, we could start small, design an initial app that integrates AR features, allowing consumers to experience our products in unique ways." The room buzzed with excitement, and Mark could see the gears turning in their minds, but just then the door swung open and in walked Jim, the company president, a stern yet enigmatic figure. Mark felt a wave of tension ripple through the room. Jim asked, eyeing the gathering. "Not at all. We're discussing some innovative concepts," one of the interviewers said. As Jim took a seat, Mark's heart raced again. This was the man who made big decisions. What would he think? "Mark, tell me about this augmented reality concept," Jim prompted, resting his hands on the table, a signal for attention. Taking a moment to gather his thoughts, Mark launched into his pitch again, this time undeterred by the scrutiny. He explained how AR could create engaging narratives around the brand, allowing consumers to interact personally with it. As he spoke, he caught sight of Henry nodding in agreement, which filled him with fresh energy. After a few moments filled with dialogue, Jim leaned back. "I like where this is going." Relief washed over Mark, but it was short-lived. The head of HR interjected. Mark felt his heart race again. Would this be the moment they decided to pass on him? As the conversation took its expected turn, a pinch of desperation surged through him. Before he could speak, Henry stood. "Mark, how about you come upstairs to meet with our executive committee?" Mark's jaw dropped in disbelief. Did the chairman just invite him upstairs? "Absolutely," he stammered, his heart racing with a mix of hope and anxiety. As they moved to the elevator, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of incredulity. The glass doors closed, and he felt a rush of cool air envelop him as the elevator ascended. This was a pivotal moment, an invitation to step beyond the confines of fear. Once they reached the upper floor, Mark stepped into a world that felt entirely different. The walls were adorned with accolades and artwork, tangible proof of hard work and achievements. It was beautiful, yet intimidating. Henry opened the door to a spacious boardroom where several prominent executives were already gathered. As they filed in, he felt the weight of their gaze. Would they see the potential in him? "Everyone, this is Mark," Henry introduced him, his voice booming with authority. Mark stood at the door, trying to remember everything he had practiced. The room was a symphony of possibility, yet the reality was glaring. This was his moment to shine, but the pressure was palpable. He stepped forward, heart pounding, ready to deliver once more. "Thank you for the opportunity," he began, the words spilling out like a flood. As he spoke, he carved a pathway through their skepticism, weaving in narratives that felt fresh and original. The room began to lean in, engaged. With each point he made, he saw intrigue sparking among them. One of the executives asked, their interest piqued. Mark felt the excitement inside him swell as he began to outline a tangible project. He described creating an experience for a new product launch, using AR to let customers visualize how it would fit into their lives. "It's not just about showing them, it's about making them feel it," he said passionately. As moments turned into discussions, they bounced ideas off one another, translating visions into actionable plans. Mark felt his confidence swell with every nod, every question. It was as if he had crossed an invisible threshold from doubt to engagement, from being an outsider to becoming an integral part of the conversation. Finally, one of the senior executives leaned forward, a smile creeping across his face. "You've got a fresh perspective." Mark could hardly believe it. They wanted to explore his ideas. The gravitational pull of his hopes had shifted. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of possibility, it was a tangible opportunity. As they wrapped up the discussion, Henry clapped Mark on the back. "Well done, Mark." "Thank you, Henry, I appreciate it," he said, feeling gratitude wash over him. As they exited the boardroom, Mark looked out at the sprawling city below. He had come so far in just a few hours, from anxious questions to powerful conversations. He had taken a leap into the unknown and landed firmly on his feet. Walking back through the expansive office, he couldn't shake the sense of disbelief. What began as a simple question asking for directions had opened the door to an unforeseen journey filled with possibilities. Stepping outside into the cool evening air, Mark took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the reality of the day settle in. He felt transformed, empowered, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Mark knew that sometimes taking that first brave step, asking for guidance, could lead to paths he had never imagined. As he walked away from the towering building, he knew he was no longer just a candidate. He was a contender, ready to make his mark on the world. Mark stood at the foot of a spectacular skyscraper, its glass facade shimmering as if it were alive. The towering building loomed over him, a giant amongst the bustling city heaved onto its shoulders. Today was supposed to be a milestone, a job interview that could pivot his life in a new direction. But instead of feeling empowered, Mark felt dwarfed by its presence, an imposter among giants. As he approached the entrance, the rotating doors looked almost like a portal to another world. He squared his shoulders and stepped inside, greeted by a flurry of activity. Around him, people dressed in sleek suits hustled from one meeting to another, their briefcases clutched tightly like shields against the outside world. The air hummed with urgency. Mark sauntered toward the receptionist, whose eyes barely glanced up from her screen. "Excuse me, I'm here for an interview with Mr. Jennings," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, but it quavered ever so slightly. "Room 1205, she replied tersely, pointing down a long corridor before returning to her work. "Thanks," Mark said, forcing a smile as he turned away. Each step he took felt like a march toward destiny, but also a descent into anxiety. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, a relentless drummer marking the seconds until he would stand before some of the most powerful figures in the industry. As he walked down the hallway, doubt crept in. What if he stumbled over his words? What if he forgot everything he had rehearsed? The walls seemed to close in around him, decorated with art that felt both sophisticated and intimidating. Mark took a deep breath, willing himself to focus on the task ahead. He finally reached room 1205, paused, and knocked gently. The door swung open, revealing a modern conference room filled with a sleek table and 4 interviewers seated around it, their expressions a mixture of interest and scrutiny. Mark could feel the weight of their gazes as he stepped inside, the room buzzing with the palpable energy of expectation. "Welcome, Mark," one of the interviewers said, noting his presence as he took a seat. "Let's start with your background." Mark cleared his throat, summoning his rehearsed lines from the depths of his nervous mind. "I've spent the last 4 years in digital marketing, specializing in brand storytelling. I believe a strong narrative can elevate a company's connection with its audience," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Another interviewer asked, "I want to help reposition your brand in the marketplace as one that truly resonates with the community," Mark replied, feeling the passion in his gut. He described efforts from his previous role where he managed to turn a struggling boutique into a bustling hub through targeted digital strategies. He spoke, some of the tension in the room visibly faded, but he still sensed the urgency pressing upon them. Time seemed to bend in that room, stretching each moment longer than the last. But as Mark elaborated on his past experiences, the clock chimed loudly from the wall, shattering the intensity of the moment. The interviewer glanced at her watch, and an unspoken weight settled heavily in the air. "Thank you for sharing so far, but we do have a tight schedule," she said, her tone turning brisk. Mark's heart dropped. Was this it? Could he be cut off just when he was finding his rhythm? But just then Henry Jennings, the chairman himself, stepped forward. His presence was striking, a man who commanded the room without even trying. "Wait a moment," Henry said, his voice firm yet inviting. "Mark, do you have any more ideas you'd like to share?" This was an unexpected chance, a lifeline thrown to him in turbulent waters. Actually, I do, Mark said, feeling the passion reignite within him. What if we utilized augmented reality in our marketing strategies? As he spoke, he felt the energy in the room shift. For the first time, their interest seemed palpable, curiosity sparking behind their eyes. Mark painted a vivid picture of customers using their phones to connect with the brand, engaging with products in ways that felt personal, tangible. That sounds intriguing, one interviewer said, leaning forward. Heart racing, Mark dove deeper, outlining how they could create an interactive app that allowed customers to visualize themselves using products before making a purchase. It's about creating a story that consumers want to be part of, he explained, seeing more nods among the interviewers. But just as the conversation became heated, the door swung open again, and another executive entered, the company's president, Jim, a formidable figure with a reputation for being tough but fair. Mark's stomach churned. Would he be support or scrutiny? Jim said. The room fell silent, all eyes darting toward him. Not at all, Henry replied, gesturing for Jim to take a seat. With the meeting shifting focus, Mark felt the stakes rising. He was no longer just an interviewee, he was in a battleground of ideas. He locked eyes with Jim, willing himself to speak clearly and confidently. Mark, tell me more about this augmented reality approach, Jim said, clearly intrigued. Mark felt a thrill shoot through him. They crave engagement. Today's consumers want experiences, not just products. By integrating AR, we can offer them a chance to interact, to feel something before making a commitment. As he elaborated, the conversation unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Their heads bobbed in agreement, and the walls of the room began to blur, their focus zeroed in on Mark. He was losing himself in the thrill of the moment. But as a few executives began whispering to one another, Mark sensed an urgency return to the atmosphere. What if they decided to move on? Just then, the head of human resources moved to speak. Mark's heart sank. Was this his last moment, and he didn't even know it? But Henry, sensing the shift, intervened. How about we take this upstairs? The words hung in the air, and Mark could hardly comprehend what was happening. He echoed, disbelief mixing with excitement. Yes, Henry confirmed, his voice unwavering. His heart racing, Mark followed Henry as they moved to the elevator. In that moment, the world around him transformed. This wasn't just an invitation. It felt like being handed a key to a door he had long dreamed of opening. Once the elevator doors opened and they stepped onto the executive floor, Mark marveled at the ambience, the sleek design, the rich wood paneling, and large windows that showcased sweeping views of the city below. This was where the decisions were made, futures shaped. Anxiety mixed with exhilaration as he followed Henry into a spacious boardroom. As they entered, a group of executives lined the long table, their expressions poised yet curious. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. This was a room filled with authority. Henry introduced him, and Mark could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Everyone, this is Mark, Henry said. Mark stood, heart pounding, as the focus shifted toward him. Took a deep breath and launched into his presentation again. As he described in detail the augmented reality application and its potential, the room crackled with energy. He could see interest growing, eyes lighting up as they began to visualize the possibilities. His thoughts flowed freely, and he felt like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Imagine a customer using their phone to enter a virtual store, exploring products in their own space, feeling connected to the brand, he stated, watching them nod. One executive leaned back, crossing his arms thoughtfully. This could be a game changer. Mark took a deep breath, ready. We'd need initial funding for development and a partnership with a tech firm specializing in AR. The room burst into conversation, ideas bouncing off the walls like sparks flying. Mark felt a rush of empowerment as he joined the discussion, attentively listening and contributing as they brainstormed possibilities. Finally, after what felt like hours of collaboration, Jim turned to Mark, a gleam in his eye. You've given us a lot to think about here, Mark. Mark felt a mix of relief and elation. They were seeing him, recognizing his potential. This wasn't merely a job interview anymore. It was a partnership, brewing a collective vision taking shape. As they wrapped up the session, Henry clapped him on the back, his expression full of approval. Well done. Thank you, Henry. I truly appreciate the opportunity, Mark responded, feeling gratitude swell within him. Mark stepped outside of the building, the cool air hitting him like a breath of fresh reality. He walked through the pulsating energy of the city, reflecting on the whirlwind day he had just experienced. He had taken a chance, asked for directions, and in doing so had opened the door to new possibilities. What had started as a simple inquiry had morphed into an extraordinary opportunity, a leap into the unknown where he had found his footing. As he stood at the edge of the sidewalk, glancing back at the skyscraper, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His heart beat with hope and excitement for what lay ahead. This was just the beginning. He wasn't just another candidate, he was a force of creativity ready to soar. And with that realization, determination surged through him, inviting him to embrace the journey that awaited. As he moved forward with the city sprawling endlessly before him, he knew he had truly discovered his path. He stood in front of the towering glass skyscraper, heart racing, mind swirling with a mix of hope and dread. Today was supposed to be the turning point in Mark's life, a job interview with one of the most prestigious marketing firms in the city. As he watched the reflection of the bustling street behind him ripple against the building's facade, he took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders and pushing aside the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, passing through the revolving door that felt like a gateway to another world. Inside, a cacophony of voices filled the air, punctuated by the clacking of heels on polished marble floors. The atmosphere was electric, and for a fleeting moment, Mark felt like an interloper in a realm filled with sharp suits and polished shoes. "Excuse me," he approached the reception desk, trying to steady his voice. The receptionist was busy typing, her hair pulled back tightly, focused on a screen. "I'm here for an interview with Mr. Room 1205 down the hall," she replied, not looking up. "Thank you," Mark replied, already feeling the weight of the world settle on his shoulders as he turned away, nerves creeping up again. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him, and each step felt heavier as he made his way down the corridor. He tried to remember all the advice he had received from friends and family, but self-doubt clawed at him. As he neared room 1205, he overheard snippets of conversations that made his stomach drop, a discussion about market trends, aggressive strategies, and innovative campaigns. Mark's pulse quickened, and he felt small, like an outsider peeking into a world far removed from his own. He reached the door, took a deep breath, and knocked. The sound echoed in the stillness, and a moment later, the door swung open. Inside, 4 interviewers sat in sleek, modern chairs, their gazes fixated on him. Mark stepped inside, feeling the intensity of their scrutiny as he took a seat. "Welcome, Mark," said a woman in a crisp white blouse, her voice both warm and commanding. "Let's start with your background." Mark felt a swell of adrenaline. It was time to prove himself. "I've spent the past 5 years in digital marketing, focusing on brand storytelling and consumer engagement," he started, his voice trembling just slightly. His words began to flow smoothly, taking shape as he shared his passion for connecting brands with consumers. He spoke of a project where he developed a high-impact campaign for a local coffee shop, showing how they reached new customers through social media storytelling, community events, and engaging visuals. As he spoke, Mark noticed subtle shifts in the interviewer's expressions. What started as skepticism morphed into intrigue. He could feel a spark of energy in the room, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they were listening. "Interesting approach," one of the interviewers said, adjusting his glasses. Mark thought back to the campaign that had nearly derailed due to a miscommunication within his team. "In one instance, we were all set to launch, but I realized the messaging didn't align with our audience's expectations. I took a step back and organized a last-minute feedback session with our customers." The interviewers nodded, and for a moment Mark felt buoyed by their engagement, but just as he began to feel at ease, the clock on the wall chimed loudly, marking the passing of precious seconds. One of the interviewers glanced at it, an unspoken urgency tightening the atmosphere. "Thank you for sharing that, Mark," the woman said, her tone shifting. "Unfortunately, we have a lot of candidates to consider." Mark's heart sank, disappointment crashing over him like a wave. Did he really not make an impression at all? Just then, Henry Jennings, the chairman himself, who had been seated quietly in the corner, suddenly leaned forward. His sharp eyes locked onto Mark's. "Wait a moment," Henry said, commanding attention. "Mark, I'd like to hear more about your ideas." This was the moment Mark had been waiting for. "Actually, I do," he said, feeling a rush of adrenaline surge through him. "What if we leveraged technology, specifically augmented reality, in our marketing strategy?" As he spoke, he could see their interest rekindling, a flicker of curiosity igniting in their eyes. He painted a picture of AR features that could transform how consumers experience the brand, allowing them to visualize products in their own lives. One interviewer asked, scribbling notes furiously. Mark felt the energy in the room shift as he detailed how AR could create captivating experiences, like virtual showrooms or interactive advertisements. He could sense the excitement building. This wasn't just about him anymore. He was part of something larger, something dynamic. But just as the conversation heated up, the door swung open, and a new figure stepped in, the company president, Jim, a man known for his sharp wit and fierce business acumen. Mark felt the atmosphere tense immediately. "What would Jim think?" Jim asked, his eyes scanning the room. "Not at all," Henry replied, gesturing for Jim to sit. With the focus now shifted completely to him, Mark felt a mixture of fear and excitement. Jim turned to him, a skeptical eyebrow raised. Mark took another deep breath, steeling himself. Today's consumers are seeking experiences, not merely transactions. By integrating AR, we can make them feel a part of our brand, allowing them to engage deeply and personally. Jim's expression softened slightly, and he leaned back in his chair. The discussion continued to flow, ideas bouncing back and forth like the exhilarating rhythm of a dance. One of the other executives leaned in, curious about the budget implications, while another began to brainstorm potential collaborations with tech firms. As the dialogue unfolded, Mark felt a thrill building inside him. He was no longer merely a candidate, he was a valued contributor in a creative conversation. Hours slipped by in what felt like minutes, and Mark found himself energizing the room with fresh ideas. Finally, Jim glanced at the clock and straightened up. This has been valuable. An exhilarating wave rushed through Mark. This was it. They saw potential in him. This was not just about landing a job, it was opening the door to opportunity, a chance to be part of something transformative. But then in a sudden twist, Jim's phone buzzed loudly on the table. Startled, he glanced down and frowned. "Excuse me, I need to take this," Jim said, standing up quickly. Mark felt a jolt of anxiety. The atmosphere had shifted again. Suddenly, all their rapt attention was now elsewhere, fixated on Jim as he stepped outside to take the call. The energy in the room dampened, and Mark felt his heart rate spike again. Would they still want to continue the conversation? Would the decision-makers leave the room before he could solidify his ideas? As conversations fizzled out, he could feel the moment slipping away. He thought, battling the dread deep in his gut, but Henry, sensing the shift, turned to Mark. "Don't worry, let's not let this moment die." Just then, Jim walked back in, his expression serious. "Apologies for that, I just received news that we need to pivot some strategies quickly. Please continue discussing your ideas, Mark." Mark felt an avalanche of pressure building. This was the kind of pivotal moment people dream of, but he had to deliver. "Actually, I believe that if we act quickly, we could prototype an AR application and push for a pilot campaign within the next quarter," he said, every word weighted with urgency. As he spoke, he could feel the room's commotion rise again. Ideas ignited, everyone sharing thoughts and questions, but just as hope filled the air, something dark lurked on the horizon. In the frenzy, Mark locked eyes with Jim, who was suddenly scribbling notes, looking increasingly worried. "I want to hear your thoughts on how this impacts our current budget and potential outcomes," Jim pressed, sincerity mingling with concern as the walls closed in. Paraphrasing facts and figures that he had memorized days before, his enthusiasm grew. But then, a loud crash echoed from the corridor, followed by a frantic shout. The atmosphere shifted drastically as fear began to settle in a flash. The executives' faces turned tense. Mark's heart jumped into his throat as he turned towards the commotion, an instinctive dread beginning to seep through him. What was happening? Henry stood up, concern etched on his face, his attention now directed toward the door. Just then, the door flew open and a panicked intern burst into the room. "Mr. Jennings, we have a situation. There's been an incident involving one of the brands in our portfolio." Mark felt his heart drop. This was the storm every candidate secretly feared but never expected. The conversation he had fought to hold on to started unraveling, and all eyes turned away from him, focused on the unfolding chaos. "Stay calm, everyone," Henry instructed, his voice steadying as he took charge. Mark's mind raced. Everything seemed to blur. He felt like a spectator in a world spinning out of control. Would this be the end of the opportunity he fought so hard for? With dread pooling in his gut, Mark faced the decision in front of him: to step back and let the chaos dictate the outcome, or to push forward and show the value he could still bring, even in a crisis. "Time to make your move, Mark," he thought, adrenaline kicking in. Only then did he realize this was the moment he'd either rise or fade into the shadows. He took a deep breath, ready to confront whatever came next. And as the room filled with tension, Mark stood there, bracing himself for the storm that was about to unfold. Little did he know that in the next moments, everything would change. His career, his journey, and the very path he had envisioned for his future hinged on the choices made today. Would he ask for more directions, or would he seize the chance to navigate uncharted territory? He knew then that his story was just beginning, but how it would unfold was entirely in his hands.